Hey Capital City family, what's up? This is Danielle Thomas coming to you guys from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, for today's quarantine Devo. I'm really excited to be here with you all today. I hope you're doing well, even though the times are definitely strange and somewhat stressful right now. Am I right? So I wanted to talk to you guys today about the names of God and just how powerful it is. God uses a lot of names throughout Scripture to identify Himself, and I've been reading this book recently. I highly recommend it if you've got some extra time during the quarantine to read. This is a great book. It's called The Power of God's Names, and it's by Dr. Tony Evans. So there's a chapter in that book called Jehovah Tsaba, which is the name of God that means God our warrior, and so God's warrior character. And the name actually is used in 1 Samuel chapter 17, which is the story of David and Goliath, so a very famous story. And in this story, God's people, the Israelites, are facing off against the Philistine army, particularly their champion, who is this giant named Goliath. And every day, Goliath comes out to the battlefield and he just looms over Israel. He taunts them and tells them to send out a warrior against him. And Israel is just paralyzed with fear. And I think that's probably what a lot of us have experienced during this strange stay-at-home season, with the pandemic happening and the virus reports coming in each day with the number of cases, the number of ventilators, how those two things aren't necessarily lining up. The death toll in Louisiana, we're becoming a hot spot, so it's getting pretty serious. It feels a lot like a giant, and it can be kind of overwhelming, especially when we just focus on the size and the scale of this pandemic, right? And that's really what God's people were doing. The Israelites were focusing on the size of Goliath, and just how unbeatable he seemed. But David comes along, and he's a teenager, so he's definitely not very big himself, definitely not a strong enough warrior to think, oh yeah, sure, I can take on Goliath, all 9 feet of him, right? But David doesn't focus on Goliath's size. He focuses on Goliath's status versus his status. And what I mean by that is David automatically, he looks at Goliath and he asks people, he looks around at the soldiers who are terrified around him, and he basically says, you guys are letting this uncircumcised person taunt the armies of the one true living God? And the key word there, it's in verse 26 in 1 Samuel chapter 17. The key word is uncircumcised. So David's pointing out that Goliath does not have a status as one of God's people. He's not a part of God's covenant relationship with Israel. He's not covered by the power of God. And so David knows that Goliath is beatable. And so instead of focusing on the size of the pandemic, I would just challenge you guys, let's focus instead on the size of our God. And let's focus on our status as God's children, because we are a part of God's family. Those of us who are Jesus followers, we're God's kids. He's got our back. He cares about us and wants to provide for us, and He'll continue to do that. Even during this time that feels really uncertain and when there's a lot of fear, God's still here walking each day with us. Another thing is when David faced off with Goliath, he took the tools that God had given him. He took his shepherd's tools, which were a slingshot and a few rocks, and he had a history of defeating lions and bears and wild animals with those kinds of things. And Saul offered him his own armor, the armor of the king, and David said, no thank you, I'm cool with the tools that God has given me. So I just want to encourage and challenge you guys, take the extra time that you have and think about what tools God might have given you to face these kinds of crazy days with during this pandemic. I guarantee you, He's not sent you into this battle without some sort of tool that you can use to serve Him during this time. Finally, last thing, as David goes off to face Goliath and he stands up and they're face to face, what he says is, I come against you in the name of Jehovah Saba. So God is going to win this battle for us. He's in the battle. He is our warrior, Jehovah Saba. So let's all remember whose name we live under and who is fighting our battles for us each day. I hope you guys have a good day today, and check back with us for the next Quarantine Devo.